All right, I am back. I know y'all missed me.
We did, Deborah, and I've opened up the Zoom for attendees to start filing in, and we've had 45 in the last few seconds. So.
Excellent. So Kenny, yes, you are all muted by default.
All right, Deborah, if you want to get started.
I shall do so. Moment here. Ah. myself out of this. So give me 1 second here and I will be smart enough to be back in. I apologize. Give me 1 second here. All right, now we are up and ready to go here. So, hello and welcome to AIA California's statewide town hall to discuss the impact of the pandemic on the architectural profession in California. My name is Deborah Gerard. I'm the 2020 AIA California president and a partner of Gruen Associates, an 80-person firm located in Los Angeles. I'm really glad to see so many of you joining us today as we've all transitioned to working remotely. We're now inundated with webinars, video conferences, and other opportunities, but we're really glad that so many of you are choosing to join us today because we think it's really important that we stay connected as a state membership. Looking back on the last 2 weeks, I know that we've all come a long way in a relatively short period of time. At my firm, we just finished our first full week in having everyone who can work remotely do so. We've had other people working remotely prior to that, but this was the first full week of everyone doing so. We've really experienced a few challenges, but also have had some really positive surprises coming from this. We pulled together in ways I would not have necessarily predicted. We communicate more and possibly better than before. We're somewhat less distracted. I suspect that many of you are having some of the same, both positive and other experiences. And I will say that one of the highlights of my week was an interaction I had with a partner in another firm, not an architectural firm, but someone in our profession. And I found that we're really both had very similar experiences. We're experiencing some of the same responses to this uncertainty. And really hearing that the experiences that this person had were very similar to ours was reassuring and really strengthened my resolve to really understand how to get through this thing. That connection is exactly why we've assembled this town hall today. Membership in the AIA binds the architectural community together, and connecting with your colleagues during these troubling times can really be helpful. So let's talk a little bit about how to work through this virtual town hall. So there's a lot of people on this call, so we can't just open the mic up for everybody. So we are suggesting that if you have a question, you click the Q&A button located in the black menu bar, either on the top of the screen or the bottom of your screen. Type in any questions that you have, and we will answer those questions. So with that, this is my lovely mug here. And I am joined by my first vice president and president-elect, Brett Doherty, AIA. Brett, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brett Doherty, as Deborah said. I'm happy to be here. I am your 2021 AIA California president and an architect in practice working for the real estate group within Google. So it's definitely been, even for a technology company, it's definitely been an interesting time to adapt, not only with how we work, but also how all of our consultants work in the architectural profession. So it's it's an interesting time for everybody for sure.
All right, so let's state out our agenda for the day here. Go to the next slide. So this will just give you a brief overview of who's going to be on this and what we're going to talk about today. We have over 1,000 AIA members who have joined town hall discussions at their local chapters throughout the state. And while questions about remote work dominated early discussions, we also heard questions about the ability of projects to continue during the shutdown, the economic impact on firms, questions about contractual responsibility, and potential impact of the federal stimulus package on employees. So in this hour, we're going to hear about the impact of Governor Newsom's shelter-in-place order on the construction industry, the results of our survey of 1,600 firm principals who were asked about their prospects over the next few months, and then hear from our panel on contracts, HR issues, and practice issues. Each of them will give an overview, and then we'll take your questions. So please be sure to use the chat box to do so. So I want to start by introducing Mark Christian. Mark is well known to many of you. He's AIA California's Director of Government Relations, and he's going to talk about the governor's statewide order, what it means for architects and construction, and what it means for local jurisdictions. Mark?
Thank you, Deborah. Hello, everyone. I'm going to be pretty brief here, hopefully. I think everyone on the call knows that on March 19th, Governor Newsom issued that executive order that changed how most Californians work today. It did not stop and does not stop working per se. It stops working from an office where one has contact with other people for the obvious reasons. The governor's order does have several exemptions. Work that's conducted in a sector that the federal government lists as an essential service is exempted. And the governor also exempted several other services, most notably or most of greatest interest to architects. He did construction, any work that provided to allow construction to proceed, to assist construction, the actual construction, and any service necessary in support of that is exempt. So for architects, that would mean working in an office or at home, in an office with other workers or at home, or on a construction job site if an architect or an architectural firm is providing staff at the firm, is providing a service that's necessary for construction to continue, whether it is responding to RFIs, construction observation, construction administration, site inspection, any of those types of services necessary for construction has a clear exemption from the governor's executive order. And here's the big if. Many local governments have issued their own health directives, their own orders that affect the performance of work. If a local government order does not exempt construction or all types of construction as the governor's has, then that will impact what an architectural firm is allowed to do, because the local order does prevail over the state order. Right now, we are not aware of the governor wanting to do anything to affect what locals are allowed to do. And we and many other groups, excuse me, have reached out to the governor's office, directly emailing the governor's point person on this, asking for clarification, such as when a local order is more restrictive, or to get the clarification on what truly is exempt. For example, if you are preparing construction documents for a hospital or even for a school or anything, does that qualify as a construction exemption? Can that work be performed in an office with other coworkers? And all these other types of questions And those questions have either gone unanswered or told no, nothing else is coming. So we are not right now expecting the governor to offer much clarification or any changes to the order. If that happens, that will be a pleasant outcome, a pleasant surprise, hopefully. But right now, we think this is what it is going to be, and we expect this order to last through April and most likely well into May, if not all the way through May as well. The governor has said he expects this to, his executive order to last for up to 8 weeks. So we don't think there's any change that's going to take place, that this is going to be lifted anytime in April, and most likely late May or into June.
And
Deborah?
thank you, Mark.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to add that obviously anyone who is still working together in an office should, of course, be expected to practice all of the safe social distancing that has been widely talked about. So I just felt like that was worth chiming in. The same goes for anyone working on a job site. There are certain prudent precautions that can be put in place to protect your staff, and we recommend so. If anyone needs any guidance on that, there's plenty of willing participants, myself included, to share what we have instructed to our firms, to our staff. And with that, should we move on to Brett?
Sure. So hello again. We wanted to give you a little bit of information on a recent survey that AIA California conducted with firm leaders last week between March 25th and the 27th, specifically about the impacts that they've experienced and are anticipating due to the pandemic. The complete overview and the survey results are available on the AIA California COVID-19 resource page on our website. So it's something that would be great to check out for follow-up on this. But we did want to spend a couple of minutes kind of talking you through some of the high-level bullet points before we get into kind of the meat of the agenda, which is the roundtable discussion later. So just a high level, there are about 146 total responses representing everyone from our 22 local chapters. 82% of the responses came from firms with 30 or less people, most of those being 1 to 5 employees, and 32% with 6 to 30. Many were already working from home, about 44%, and a majority of the responses indicated that their firm was prepared to work remotely when the stay-at-home order went into place. The next one is the fun stuff, and it's kind of the real meat of what people who are working at home, particularly in our profession, and actually I guess all, are experiencing, which is the real kind of challenges from working at home. I know I've experienced just about all these and then quite a few more, as most of you have as well. Some of the big ones are slowing the exchange of ideas in some regard, just alternative way of meeting versus in person, which we're all more accustomed to and used to. It's harder to make connections with current and new opportunities. It's hard, obviously, a construction industry, not being able to be on a job site sometimes. That's obviously fundamentally a difficult situation. A big one, myself personally, and again, many other, balancing homeschool with kids, with work. It's a lot of things to balance at one time, for sure. Having general staff oversight. Another big one is internet bandwidth. That's been an interesting one to see as we move forward. And then many other things, IT troubles, and then many more that we just haven't really come across yet. As this goes on longer and longer, there'll be more things that we couldn't anticipate. But there are also people who report that it's been pretty seamless. So that's kind of an interesting positive highlight there as well. So what if there's not enough work? Responses were split. Firms are still trying to figure this one out for sure. Many have contract or hourly employees and they won't need to create work that isn't there for them. Many responded that they have reserves and aren't worried yet. We should note we received a large amount of responses from smaller firms who may not have the staff to lay off, but we need to find a way to supplement their own work, or what will need to find a way to supplement. Most responses, 37% indicated no anticipated impact to staffing levels, while the majority of the remaining responses estimate they can continue current staffing levels for at least 2 to 3 more months. As for the impact to current projects, most report that at least a portion of their projects have been impacted to some extent. 10%, 25%, or 40%, and a couple reported an even higher amount, with temporary holds and some delayed indefinitely. Many note that it's still early and they're waiting to see how this will all impact them. For those still working on the projects, the remote nature of work right now is causing things to move along slower than usual, which is expected. When asked if they think their firm will suffer decreased revenues this year, most, 25%, acknowledge that it's still too early to tell, while just 8% don't expect any decrease in their revenue. 20% of the responses estimate a 30% or higher decrease in this year. Help with business finances, most respondents, 70%, reported that being interested in business loans or grants of some sort, but just over 8% have begun the process to apply. We did receive one response reporting that their loan or grant application has already been accepted. Firms are preparing themselves for a myriad of impacts this year due to this pandemic, including a decline in new projects. Next slide. So how about long-term impacts? The question of, do you anticipate any long-term changes to firm operations was asked. Many report that they do not anticipate a long-term change to operations, or it's just too early to tell. Several speculate they'll see limited growth, increased utilization of remote working tools and virtual meetings with clients, and more flexible hours. Some are seeing the benefits of coming into the office highlighted more than ever now, and a couple others reported considering just retiring altogether. About the question of, what do you think about the pandemic, or how do you think the pandemic will impact your firm in 2021? Over 60% said that it's just too early to tell right now, which is a common answer as we all kind of navigate through the unknown moving forward. But you can see that many are already starting to anticipate decreased revenues and staff sizes, increased delays from permitting agencies and inspectors, and that projects may still be on hold. It's also important to note, in addition to AIA California's survey, the National AIA also surveyed firm leaders earlier this month to learn more about the pandemic's impact on the profession. And while Californians thought it's too early to tell the impact on the projects, the national findings are predicting a steeper impact. A link to that survey is available also on the AIA California COVID-19 response page I mentioned earlier on our website. Just some key findings from the national survey: 59% of firms expect inquiries for new work to decline in March. 67% have already seen prospective projects slow or stop. 76% of the firms have confronted at least one problem with their current projects related to the COVID-19 outbreak. Nearly half of firms indicated that all or virtually all their staff are now working remotely, and firms anticipate revenue losses of 10% in March and upwards of 15% in April. So again, those are all just some high-level summaries of what the survey that AIA California put together recently. I stress everybody should go to the AIA California COVID-19 response page for further information. So with that, I will pass it back to Deborah to get the panel going. Thank you.
Deborah, I think you're still on mute.
Thank you. Yes.
There we go.
Always better to actually be speaking, not on mute. All right, so let me introduce our panelists for this. So David Barker will go over what we need to know about contracts with our vendors and clients during these uncertain times. David is a partner with Collins, Muir & Stewart, and is a managing partner of the Inland Empire office. He has represented design professionals for over 20 years in all aspects of their practice, including construction claims, intellectual property rights, contract negotiation, administrative boards, and transactional matters. David has served as amicus counsel for the AIA National and AIA California before the California Supreme Court, and is a member of the AIA California Advocacy Advisory Committee, and has participated in the drafting and negotiation of a variety of statutes impacting design professions. David?
Thank you, Deborah, and good afternoon, everybody. So I was asked by the AIA to chime in here, and my partner Ryan, who Deborah will introduce in a moment, will address more of the HR issues. But for the last week, a lot of the calls that I've been getting have been really focused on the what does this mean type of question. And I'm going to address a few different things. I know the slide says contracts, but I want to go a little bit broader than just contracts. One of the big questions, of course, is liability issues. And how is this pandemic going to potentially impact people with regards to liability? For example, if your projects are slowed down or delayed, how is that going to impact you? Or how do you deal with the elements such as construction administration or contract administration during this time period? One of the things to keep in mind is what the standard of care is for an architect. And ultimately, it's how would another reasonable architect act in the same or similar circumstances. So if we think back to what Deborah said at the beginning in her introduction, we heard her say that we're not alone in this. Everybody's in the same boat. So part of the issue here for liability concerns is to think about how is everybody else handling this. In a lot of what we're doing today, this Zoom meeting is how people are starting to handle things. So in terms of how to continue to provide services, Mark pointed out that construction has been deemed an essential service. And I certainly have clients that are working construction projects all over the place of all different types, and they're continuing to do that. And you want to continue to provide those services to your clients. So what does that mean for you in terms of your contracts? Well, you've got contracts to do jobs. You have to continue to provide those services. Now, there are certain areas of the state, certain counties where there have been some pretty strict shutdowns, and you obviously have to comply with what those authorities are addressing or requiring. I did have one client in the last week that was contacted by his local municipal authority indicating that his was operating in violation of an order and requiring that he shut down, until he pointed out that they are a architectural firm and participating in essential services. Pretty quickly, he got back a response that they weren't deemed essential and were able to continue operating, but to implement the social distancing as much as possible. One of the keys to all of this, for your projects, for your employees, for everything, is to communicate. Talk to your clients on the projects. Everybody obviously knows this is going on, but sort of bring it up in terms of the context of the project. There will be supply lines that are going to be slowed down or limited. There are going to be technical difficulties. Perhaps a subcontractor doesn't have access on site to computer networks to be able to have a Zoom meeting, etc. So there are going to be some slowdowns of things, and you need to communicate that with your clients and project owners, communicate it with your subconsultants and with your employees. Where possible, try to do video or virtual meetings. If your meeting that's scheduled is purely to review pay applications, try to do that via email rather than getting together. Keep in mind that the old role of site safety still belongs to the general contractor. And so the general contractor is the one that has to be responsible to step up and make sure that the site is safe. And that would include complying with any of the pandemic orders that have been issued in terms of social distancing, etc. If you have employees continuing to go to the site, and Ryan will get into more of the details on that, but they can go to the site, and if they feel for any reason that things are not being handled appropriately, they should be able to voice their concern and not be at the site, if possible at all. One of the contract elements that I wanted to touch on briefly as well is leases. If there's anybody on the call that is either looking to move into a new space or is looking to have a lease end, you're going to want to take a look at those types of documents as well to make sure that you're going to have that ability. I've had a couple of lease issues come up in the last week, 2 weeks, having to deal with, will the space be ready? What if we can't move into the space? And you're going to want to communicate with the people or take a look at your lease language to see how that gets impacted. One of the last things that I want to touch on briefly before I'll hand it back is some of the various programs that are out there. And by no means do I want this to be any kind of in-depth description of the programs. I will tell you that even this morning I was researching some of this with the Small Business Administration, and while their webpage even has some information, they're still getting up to speed. But we all know that the stimulus package was passed in the last week by the federal government. And generally what that does for most small businesses is it makes various loans available. And if the loans are available and you use those for certain items, primarily for payroll and or rent, then you can get that loan forgiven so that you do not have to pay it back. There are a variety of restrictions in terms of if you conduct layoffs or salary reduction during the covered period, which is March 1 through June 30, that it may impact your ability to get certain forgiveness. And there are various elements as to how those amounts are calculated of what you are available to get. But by all means, you can look into the various programs that are out there. The SBA, with the federal agency, the Small Business Administration, is the agency to start with, and they will help you put that together. I think I saw somebody pop a question up a second ago asking about whether to continue to go for site visits. That really has to be done on a case-by-case evaluation. That there are some site visits that if the construction is continuing, you're going to have to go to. And that might be for a foundation observation, or you might have to have your structural engineer go take a look at things. Again, the contractor should be the one responsible for making sure the site is safe, meaning complying with the various rules, and you shouldn't be forced to sit in a long meeting in a small enclosed space with other people without the appropriate distancing. But overall, yes, you should continue to service your clients and service your projects. And if that means going to the site, then you can go to the site. I have talked to some clients that are trying to do virtual observations, such as having people use cameras on site to look at things. And if the element you're looking at is susceptible to that, then by all means, try to employ the technology that's available. But I think that there will be some elements that you won't be able to do that with, and you'll have to be on site. Obviously, communicating with the project participants about where the project is to make sure that if you go to site, you get the most bang for your buck, so to speak, is one of the best ideas. I just saw somebody posting as well a question about the 404 error that is coming up on the SBA website. Yes, some of their programs that they are trying to put the information together on, I've gotten the same error, and the SBA is trying to play catch up along with everybody else to try to get the information out there, and it's just not quite there. I did see something pop up a moment ago about can a client compel an architect to go to the site. I don't, and this is the evolving nature of what we're dealing with. If it is unsafe, I don't think that they could compel you to go to a site and put safety at risk. But from a contractual standpoint, you do have an obligation to continue to perform that contract. And again, I think that what you can do is point to the contractor's obligation to make the site safe for you to be able to do that. I think I was allotted about 5 or 6 minutes to go through things. So Deborah, I can pass it back to you.
Yeah, Dave, I will take it back. I do have one question for you before I pass it on to Ryan that I would like you to answer. And then for everybody who's on the call, if it's actually helpful if you can type your questions into the Q&A instead of the chat bar. So if you could please do that, it'll be more orderly for us to make sure that every question gets properly answered. So Dave, my question for you is, with the SBA loans, why wouldn't every firm who qualifies within their definition apply for one? What would be the downside?
I really don't know of any. Obviously, this is a new program, and I started going through it last week, 200 and some odd pages of legislation that, of course, covers everything from small businesses through the airlines and and down to the individual checks that are supposed to be issued. I really can't think of any reason why somebody would not apply for this. What the legislation has really done is they've expanded the scope of who can qualify. And generally now it's anybody with a firm or a business that has less than 500 employees would now qualify for one of these loans. You'll want to pay attention as you're going through the process as to how much you can apply for and what it can be used for. For example, during the covered period, an individual employee cannot be paid more than $33,333 with the loan proceeds, at least based on my reading of the legislation. So if you have employees that are typically paid more than that, the loan proceeds, or at least the forgiveness element, will only go up to the $33,333 during the 4-month window. If you do the math really quick, what you see is they're trying to use the loan program and forgiveness to compensate people that are making less than $100,000 a year. But by all means, and I have spoken to a number of clients and even other businesses I've dealt with in the last week, telling them about the programs and trying to get them to look into them to help keep payroll going.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right, moving on to your partner, Ryan Kohler. Ryan will discuss what you need to know about HR operations during this time. Ryan leads the employment law practice at Collins, Muir & Stewart and works extensively in the architecture and engineering world on issues of employment, contracts, professional liability, and claim defense. He has worked extensively with design professionals and defended them in trials, arbitrations, and administrative hearings. He counsels clients to help minimize the risk of workplace claims through educating managers, informing principles of legal trends and changes to the law, drafting employee handbooks, providing harassment seminars, advising on terminations and discipline, and litigating employment law issues before the courts and administrative agencies. Thanks for being here, Ryan. The webinar is yours.
Thank you very much, Deborah. I've got a couple things that I'll go ahead and cover for everyone. I've got some slides, but at the moment I'm not able to share them while the other set of slides is up, so I'll just go through the overview. We're going to take a look at the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which is the new federal leave law, and then also talk about how to handle things like pay reductions, furloughs versus layoffs, how the recent crisis deals with ADA and the Fair Employment and Housing Act, and a little bit of compliance with isolation orders. And I think I've got control of the seminar now. So let me. So there we go. For the federal leave law, which is called the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, it's a federally mandated law, so it applies to everyone regardless of what a state or local jurisdiction will do. It applies to people with or employers with 500 employees or less, or 499 or less, and it provides 80 hours of full pay at the regular rate with a cap of $511 per day and a total cap of $5,000 and change per employee. And there's 3 categories to qualify for this. There's the quarantine or isolation order, being advised by healthcare to self-quarantine if you're having symptoms. So the individual is basically impacted, they get that. There's also a provision that allows for 2/3 pay with a daily cap of $200 and a total cap of $2,000 per employee if they are doing something like sharing or caring for an individual, or caring for their child because school is closed. Now they don't have anybody to look after their children while this is going on. Additionally, there's also very limited paid FMLA rights. Typically, FMLA is not paid at all. But if you or an employee can't work because of childcare issues, then they are entitled to paid FMLA leave for that reason, 10 weeks. It's 12 weeks total. The first 2 weeks are unpaid, and they can use one of their other leaves, including the leave noted above, or regular PTO if they've got it. And all of this leave, even it's mandated by the federal government, and it can all be paid through federal payroll tax credits. So it's less than optimal than if they just sent you a check, but if you've got some sort of escrow account for federal payroll taxes, you can go ahead and dip into that to pay these things. Additionally, this is only available to employees if they cannot work or they cannot telework. So if they can actually do work, they're not entitled to any of this leave. So it's not just, I'm home working on my laptop, I want to take leave. They can't do it under those circumstances. If you are going to take steps to, emergency measures to preserve funds at the firm and you're reducing pay, you can only do that going forward. So you can't, dock somebody's pay for work that they've already performed. You have to provide written note of the change within 7 days of the change, and I would provide that sort of notice regardless. If you're dealing with exempt employees, there's some special treatment involved. The employee has to be allowed to return to full salary when economic conditions permit. This change is only allowed if there's significant economic difficulties, which you've got, and if the pay falls below the exemption limit, which is currently 2 times the local minimum wage. The employee loses the exemption, and at that point you have to pay them, overtime and hourly. And the law is also concerned that you can't be altering somebody's exempt status or changing their pay if they're being salaried all the time so that it becomes a sham. I think in this circumstances, it's not really something you need to worry about, but something to keep in mind overall. When you're complying with the ADA and FEHA, you want to make sure to obviously continue following the law on those respects. But if an employee is posing a direct threat to the workplace, you can send them home. They're not protected. There's no accommodations required. So if somebody shows up and they look they're absolutely entitled to just say, get out of here. If you send an employee home after they report, so they show up to work, I'm ready to work, here I am, and you're like, get out of here. They are entitled to reporting time pay. But if you tell them ahead of time, at least a couple hours ahead of time, don't show up today if you've got symptoms or something like that, or you're not scheduled today because of symptoms, there is no sort of entitlement. That's just for hourly people who show up and get sent home early. If there is some type of exposure, you want to keep confidentiality. You still have an obligation to contact the other employees who are out there, though. So if there is an exposure incident, what you want to do is you want to tell an employee that they have been around someone who is potentially exposed and should take actions accordingly. Don't name the source. Some employees are obviously going to figure it out because there's just not that many employees possibly that you're working with. Also, some of the orders that I've seen have defined exposure as being within 6 feet of someone for more than 10 minutes. So if you in a work environment and there was somebody who turns out to test positive or suspected to test positive, and they're like, they walked by my office once on their way to the break room or the bathroom or something like that. That's not really an exposure level. But if it's like, we got a conference room together and we sat together and we went over plans and documents and had a meeting in a close quarters for an hour. That's exposure. Or I rode in a car with somebody, and I was in the front seat and they were in the front seat for an hour. That's exposure. And the next issue to note is there's the compliance with the exemption order. And so, sorry about that. The state order exempts construction workers, and I think that can be stretched to include people like architects. Architecture is a professional service, and professional services that are needed to support critical sector services are exempt. The state has confirmed you don't need any sort of note or authorization from the state to do work. I do know that firms are providing notes as just a precautionary measure in case somebody asks something, to say, look, construction projects are exempt. We're working on construction projects. That's why we're out and about. I would also recommend that you should be checking your local county and city ordinances. Most of them are incorporating the state's exceptions. I am familiar with like the County of Los Angeles order, which notes that if you are exempt under one of the state rules or one of the county's exemptions, just make sure people are practicing their social distancing, so you're keeping 6 feet away, and that all the employees have appropriate hand sanitizing facilities. So wash basins with soap or hand sanitizer is liberally distributed or available at the job site. So I know there's some questions of, what should we do if we've got employees who don't want to go out to a job site because of this? Well, technically, if they are part of a exempt industry and they're supposed to be doing work, then the isolation orders don't apply to them. And so you can order them to go out there. But I think just from a question of morale, that's a dangerous thing to do if your workers are starting to hear that somebody was legitimately concerned about their safety and they were told to go out anyway. What you can do is you can provide sanitizing measures for them, possibly some PPE, and if somebody else can take that assignment or it can be done remotely, try to do it that way. But if push comes to shove and the work needs to get done and the person's refusing to do it, you can order them to go ahead and go out there if it's required under the job and it needs to get done. And if they're refusing to do so, then you can make them say, well, you're available to work and you're refusing, so this is going to be a day without pay or something like that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop my slide sharing, and I'll pass it back.
Okay, and I know there are a few other questions for you. Oh, that was...
All right.
Okay.
Let's take a look at the Q&A.
Right,
I would say that the shelter under employment law, the shelter in place order is a quarantine or isolation under the law. So if somebody is subject to the isolation order and they cannot work or telework, then they would be available to take the federal FMLA. I also was asked, can people take the emergency FMLA intermittently? I do know that regular FMLA can be taken intermittently. The Department of Labor has just issued some guidelines on this. And I got to be frank, they're pretty vague. Basically, they say, can you take intermittent leave? Please try to work it out with your employee. It doesn't say you have to. It doesn't say you don't have to. The Department of Labor is still writing the regulations for this. One thing I would note is that the law specifically says it's not actually going to be strictly enforced for the first couple of weeks. As long as people are trying to comply in a good faith, making a good faith effort to comply. So if you've got somebody that's asking to take some intermittent leave, first of all, if they're an hourly employee, then that's when you'd be looking at making changes pay, willing for somebody who's salaried or exempt. And then, you just try to work something out that's reasonable for you and for them. That's the current status of the Department of Labor guidelines on it.
Okay, Ryan, and we need to move on to Bill, but there was one more question for you that maybe you can quickly answer about how a furlough would affect a staff member on a visa.
As with an immigration issue, I'm not sure how that would work, but since a furlough is not a termination and it is a temporary kind of cessation of work while benefits are continued, the person is still employed. So I don't think that would have any impact on their visa. And I would also be expecting that the agency responsible for administering that is going to be taking note of the emergency and giving appropriate exceptions.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Let's move on. Our last panelist is Bill Helmuth, FAIA, Chairman and CEO of HOK. And Bill will round out this discussion with information on how to generally maintain business while we're sheltering in place. Bill is, in addition to being Chairman and CEO, he's the design principal for the Washington, D.C. office. He's known for his creative design approach, innovative problem solving, and exceptional client service. Bill joined HOK's St. Louis studio in 1991, and 2 years later was appointed to lead the firm's office in DC. After more than a decade as design principal in DC, he was elected firm-wide president in 2005, CEO in 2016, and chairman in 2017. Bill is a senior fellow of the Design Futures Council, a member of the Delos Advisory Board, and a GSA Design Excellence Peer. The University of Virginia School of Architecture honored him with its Distinguished Alumni Award. Bill, the floor is yours, so to speak.
Well, thank you. That's quite an introduction. I'm going to have to find out whoever wrote that spiel.
Well, we're honored to have you, so the introduction is appropriate.
Well, I'm going to just sort of do a stream of consciousness. First of all, I've got to say, I have spent the last several weeks working with people like David and people like Ryan, and I've got to tell you, thank goodness that they are around and can guide us and can help us through a whole series of issues that just are not always intuitive. You know, I think, you know, as architects and designers, we always want to do the right thing, but we don't always know state by state and place by place what the laws are that surround the right thing. And we lean heavily on people like Ryan and David to help us through all of that. So I thank, on behalf of the architects who like to design stuff, I really thank the legal profession and the HR profession for really helping us through a lot of this stuff. I'm going to talk a little bit more about sort of what we are doing and what has worked so far. You know, we're all going to be affected by this. I think our fee volume will take a hit. I don't think we know exactly what that will be. You know, we're actually probably positioned better than most because we do so much institutional work, and that seems to be more resilient to this kind of thing. One of the things that, you know, I take heart from is that this particular event has a start and a finish. We don't know precisely when that finish is, but we know it has, unlike other kinds of financial events, we don't know when the finish is going to be. But because we are a global firm and we have 3 offices in Asia, we've seen them, they are really a couple of months ahead of us. And we have seen them see the light at the end of their tunnel. Our Beijing office, for example, now has gone from no one being in the office to allowing 50% of the people to be back in the office. Shanghai is even more than that. They're on the back end of this whole coronavirus. And so, you know, they were sort of, for us, kind of like the canary in the mine. They've seen the things occur, and there is an end to it. Now, will we be the same after this? I don't think so. I think our practices are going to be different. You know, we've seen how retail has changed because of the advent of retail, sort of internet retail, as opposed to going into stores. I think this is just going to really accelerate that. I think that we're going to see workplace change in sort of dramatic ways because a lot of people have seen that working remotely can work. Now, is it perfect? Absolutely not. There's, you know, nothing is. But there's certain things that we try and promote, which has been successful, which, you know, I'm a great believer in the office of geography, that you always have a team sitting together because someone will overhear something and join in on the conversation and so forth. You can't do that if we're all remote, and we are all remote. We do have check-ins every morning on a job basis. If there's a particular project, even if it's just for 5 minutes, everybody checks in. We have a lot more communication with the rest of the offices. We have a lot more kind of virtual happy hours and things like that at the end of each week. I'm really sort of surprised and delighted at how well working from home is working. There are going to be other issues. There are issues like we're now doing video interviews for projects, and we're having to learn how to do that. And I kept telling my team, if we don't learn how to do it on a video, look at what happened to Richard Nixon when he was running against John Kennedy. Kennedy understood the media. Nixon didn't. And even though at the time Kennedy was not as seasoned and so forth, but he understood the media and walked away with those debates. So we're going to have to learn different ways of communicating to clients who we don't yet know over the video. There are lots of things that I think we need to consider. One of the things in the questions, one of the things that had not come up yet in our discussions, but the whole issue of furlough and visa and what that means. And that's something, because we do have a lot of people who are in the position of being over here on visas and so forth. And that's something that I'm going to get right off of this panel and in discussion with our legal people to find out what we need to know about that, so we can provide kind of the best for the people who work for us that we possibly can. Now, there are certain things, and you talked about really the only thing that we have going, and there are a couple things here and there, but the only thing is CA and going to a job site. I would urge everyone on the call, and I know that you can order someone to go to that's part of working from home. The dog is here. But you could order somebody to go to the job site, but if you don't have to, you really, we would choose not to. And one of our best CA people that we have has said, look, I'm over 60, I've got a pre-existing condition, I just can't go to the job site. And so we've made accommodations. He's doing things by video, he's doing other things, and we're finding someone else to fill in for that. And I think each of us really needs to find ways of kind of making things like that happen. So I think I could go on, but we wouldn't have any time for questions and answers. But it's it's all about communication. I think that's where David started, and that's where probably I'll finish on this. Is we have to work twice as hard to communicate with those that are on our teams and that are working with us. And that communication, I can't stress enough how the quality of the communication and the frequency of the communication, even if it's not the perfect quality, have lots of it, because that's really what's going to get us through this and what is going to overcome some of the issues that are brought up of the distance that you have inherent in having a piece of technology between you and the person that you're communicating with.
Thank you, Bill. That was quite helpful. All right, we are going to move into the last few minutes here for Q&A, and I just want to stress that anyone whose questions are not answered directly during this Q&A, we will answer them, and we will send out all the questions and all the answers or we'll post the questions and the answers as a part of our posting this recorded webinar as well for your future use or use by your colleagues. So with that, I'm going to throw out the last one here just because, no, it's not actually the last one. Well, it was the one that caught my attention here in terms of fulfilling a contract. Is this the right for architects to fulfill a contract and continue office operations? For instance, folks are working remotely, but you need to pick up mail, checks, ensure IT infrastructure is working properly. Is this okay? Are we allowed to do this now or when access becomes more limited to non-essential service businesses? And before I turn this over to probably Dave to comment on, I'm gonna just let you know that I am currently in my office. Almost all of our staff is not, but I'm here with our accountant so that I can process checks and make sure that people get paid when payroll is processed this week. So that is something I'm doing. I believe I'm doing it within the right of keeping the business going. But Dave, why don't you comment on that, please?
Well, Deborah, I think you're exactly right, and particularly with construction being deemed an essential service, and we are talking about support of those construction efforts, that you can have people in the office, you can have people go into the office, perhaps just to pick up mail or take care of some of the key elements. Like you, I am doing this call from my office right now. And maybe I'm stretching it more that since we're so embedded in the construction industry, we're viewing it as we're here to support that industry as well. But yes, you can go into the office to obtain mail and to keep the keys going. I don't know if anybody noticed if when this all first started coming out with the various orders, Orange County, California came out with an order that was very similar to the Bay Area orders, and it appeared to be a shelter and home order. About 4 hours later, they came out with clarification to say, no, we want you to keep working. One of the keys is they want to keep the economy moving. They want to keep people employed. They want to keep things going. And so with that, yes, by all means, keep your practice going. If you're in an area that is under a more strict lockdown order, then only go in for the limited purposes that you have to, and then go back home. But by all means, yes, keep your business going.
Okay, I'm kind of going at random here through these questions because there's a bunch of them and we won't get to them all. I'm trying to pick on the ones that might be most useful for the broader group. There's a comment and that's been made about the SBA program. I just moved. My banker explained to me an hour ago that there are two different programs, one through the Treasury administered by SBA, and the program that was passed last Friday by Congress that will be through your local banks. The second program is the one that has the possibility of applying for the loan to be converted to a grant. My banker tells me the Treasury program does not have that possibility. Regulations are still being developed, so everything may still change. And one of you lawyers talk about this?
Yeah, actually, Deborah, if you read through the legislation, the two separate programs the person is referencing there are sort of one program. When the SBA does a lot of these elements, whether you call what used to be known as the 7A loans, or even these disaster relief loans, or the program I was looking at this morning, the payroll protection program, essentially they are a loan from a separate outside bank. The loan is guaranteed by the federal government. But within the guidelines of these programs, if you use the loan for the proper purpose within the time period and can document that, you then apply to that bank for forgiveness of that loan. And the legislation that I've read is pretty broad in terms of saying that if somebody has produced the documents showing they used it for payroll and these necessary expenses, then their loan should be forgiven.
Okay, thank you. There have been several comments about sole proprietors and requests for information about how a sole proprietor can apply for aid during this downturn. Is there something that we can post, I'm assuming, for this large group of people?
Well, it should be the same programs. In fact, part of my research last week and today was going through some of the application forms themselves. And in looking at those, the sole proprietor designation should be just fine to apply for the loan right alongside a corporation or a partnership.
Great. And does that also apply to unemployment for a sole proprietor?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, in consideration of everyone's time, it is now 1 o'clock, so I'm going to suggest that we need to wrap this up, as people will need to move on to other things, but I assure you we will answer all of these questions and get them out. Nikki or Hillary, do you want to talk about the mechanics of that briefly?
Sure. This is Nikki. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We will be posting the recording of the webinar as well as a transcript of the questions and answers as soon as we can impose a little bit more on our panelists' time this week. So hope to have it out to you by in the next few days. We will also, if you haven't had a chance yet to look at the COVID-19 resources page on AIACalifornia.org, I would encourage you to do that. There's a number of resources there that we continue to update daily. In addition, we'll post the survey results that Brett spoke about earlier. And then finally, we are still working on additional town halls and topics for them. And we had planned a poll today, but it didn't quite work out. But one of them that I'm working on right now is having one of the administrators from the Small Business Administration for Arizona, California, and Nevada on a town hall webinar in the next couple of weeks. So stay on the lookout for that, and we will continue to do these as long as the members need them. So thank you all.
All right. Well, thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to all of you who participated, and to those of you answering questions, asking questions. I guess we're answering them. To those of you asking questions, thank you for your questions. I hope that everyone stays safe, and thanks for participating. Take care.
Thank you.